The day we opened my grandmother's coffin, it wasn't grief that made my hands shake. It was the envelope, tucked beneath the silk lining, yellowed, sealed, addressed to me. And inside it, proof that everything my family believed about her was a lie. By the time I finished reading her final words, I realized something chilling. She hadn't just died with secrets. She had died waiting for justice, and someone in my family knew exactly what had been stolen from her. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This is my story of betrayal, and if you've ever trusted the wrong person, hit that subscribe button because you are not alone. Here is how it happened. I was reading comments on my YouTube videos the other day, and I realized I wasn't the only one who grew up hearing half-truths wrapped in family loyalty. So many of you said the same thing. We didn't know our elders were carrying wars inside them. Neither did I. To me, my grandmother Eleanor was soft-spoken, gentle, almost invisible at family gatherings. She never interrupted, never complained, never told stories about her youth unless pressed, and when she did, she kept them brief, carefully trimmed, like a garden she refused to let overgrow. We were told she had a hard start. We were told she lost some money. We were told she chose peace over conflict. That's how my father phrased it. But what I discovered after her death shattered that narrative completely. It started 2 weeks after the funeral. The house felt hollow without her, the kind of silence that hums in your ears at night. I volunteered to clear out her attic. No one else wanted to. My aunts claimed it was too emotional. My father said he was too busy handling legal matters. Legal matters. At the time, I didn't question it. The attic smelled like old cedar and dust. Sunlight streamed through a small circular window, catching particles in the air like suspended memories. Boxes were stacked neatly, labeled in her precise handwriting: winter linens, recipes, letters. It was the last one that pulled me in. The letters were tied with twine, organized by year: 1968, 1969, 1970. My grandmother would have been barely 21 then. Inside were exchanges between her and a law firm I'd never heard of. The tone wasn't friendly. It was formal, defensive, cold. Miss Whitmore, as previously stated, your claim lacks sufficient standing. Without documented proof of paternity acknowledgement, the estate has been lawfully transferred. Estate? I felt something tighten in my chest. My grandmother had told us her father died when she was young. She said there wasn't much left, that her older brothers handled everything. But these letters suggested something very different. There had been an estate, a substantial one, land, investments, property, and she had fought for it. My fingers trembled as I flipped through page after page, her handwriting in the margins, notes like, "They're lying," and "Mother said father promised equally," and once, underlined twice, "I will not let them erase me." Erase me. That's when the first crack appeared in the story I'd been told my whole life. I went downstairs and confronted my father. He was at the kitchen table, staring at spreadsheets. He barely looked up. "Dad," I said carefully, "did Grandma ever sue her brothers?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That was a long time ago. Family disagreement, nothing worth digging up. But he didn't ask how I knew. That silence told me more than words ever could. I pressed further. "Did Grandma have money?" He leaned back slowly. She believed there was, but she misunderstood the situation. Misunderstood. The word felt rehearsed. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the letters in my mind, the legal dismissals, the undertone of condescension. A young woman being told she had no standing, no claim, no proof. And I began to understand something deeper. This wasn't just a family argument, it was systemic. In 1969, women couldn't even get a credit card without a male cosigner. Property rights for daughters, especially unmarried daughters, were often entangled in patriarchal legal frameworks that favored male heirs. If documentation was withheld or manipulated, proving entitlement would have been nearly impossible. Had her brothers taken advantage of that? The next day, I drove to the county records office. It felt almost cinematic, fluorescent lighting, metal filing cabinets, the low hum of bureaucracy. I requested property records under my great-grandfather's name. The clerk returned with a thin folder, too thin. According to official documentation, most of the land had been transferred 6 months before his death, sold to a private buyer, and the remaining assets were distributed to next of kin, which listed only my grandmother's 2 older brothers. Her name was nowhere. No mention, no signature, no waiver. It was as if she had never existed. I sat there staring at the paperwork, my pulse echoing in my ears. Either she had willingly relinquished her claim, or someone had removed her from the equation entirely. That's when I noticed something peculiar. The buyer of the land, a shell corporation that dissolved 3 years later, and the listed legal representative for that corporation, the same attorney who had written those dismissive letters to her. My stomach dropped. This wasn't misunderstanding. This smelled like orchestration. I went home shaking. That evening, I called my Aunt Margaret, my grandmother's youngest sister-in-law. She had always been kinder, quieter than the others. When I mentioned the estate, there was a long pause on the line. "Your grandmother wasn't crazy," she said softly. "She just didn't have power." The words landed heavy. "She showed up to the probate hearing alone," Margaret continued. "Your uncles had 3 lawyers." Alone. 22 years old, facing her own brothers and their legal team. "She kept saying father promised equal shares," Margaret whispered, "but there was no written amendment, no updated will." "And the land sale?" I asked. Another pause. "Your uncles were struggling financially back then," she said carefully. "Very suddenly, they weren't." The pieces were aligning into something darker than I'd expected. But there was still one question that gnawed at me. If my grandmother had truly been cheated, why had she stopped fighting? Why did the letters end abruptly in 1972? I went back to the attic the next day and searched deeper. Beneath the labeled boxes, behind old quilts, I found a small locked tin. Inside were newspaper clippings. One headline froze my blood. "Young woman accused of fraudulent claim against estate." Her name printed beneath it. The article painted her as opportunistic, emotional, misguided. It quoted an anonymous family source stating she had imagined promises that were never made. Public humiliation, character assassination. Suddenly I understood. They hadn't just taken her inheritance, they had destroyed her credibility. I felt anger rising, raw and protective. She had spent decades being described as peaceful when in reality she had been silenced. But the final blow was yet to come. At the bottom of the tin was a faded photograph. My grandmother standing beside her father in front of a vast stretch of farmland, his hand resting firmly on her shoulder, both smiling. On the back, in his handwriting, "For Eleanor, equal to your brothers, always." signed and dated. It wasn't a legal document, but it was proof of intent. And that's when I realized something chilling. If that photo existed, if those letters existed, then someone in my family knew the truth all along, and they had chosen silence. As I held that photograph, my phone buzzed. A message from my father. "We need to talk tonight. Don't involve outsiders." My chest tightened, because suddenly this wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about what someone was afraid I might uncover next. My father was already waiting when I walked into his house that night. The living room lights were dimmed, curtains drawn tight, even though it wasn't fully dark yet. It felt deliberate, contained, like he didn't want the outside world witnessing whatever conversation was about to unfold. He didn't offer tea, didn't ask how I was holding up. He just gestured toward the sofa. "You've been digging," he said. It wasn't a question. I sat across from him, the photograph tucked safely inside my bag like evidence in a courtroom. I found grandmother's letters and the property records and the article. His jaw flexed. That was 50 years ago. That doesn't make it irrelevant. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You don't understand the context." "Then explain it." Silence stretched between us like a wire pulled too tight. Finally, he exhaled sharply. "Your grandmother believed she was entitled to something she wasn't legally guaranteed. But her father promised. A promise isn't binding," he snapped. The intensity in his voice startled me. "And humiliation is," I shot back, "smearing her name in the newspaper, calling her delusional?" His eyes flickered. There it was, something unguarded. Not guilt, not exactly, but discomfort. "You're reopening wounds that were closed for a reason." "Closed for who?" He stood abruptly and paced toward the fireplace. "For the family, for stability." That word again, stability. I reached into my bag and placed the photograph on the coffee table between us. He stopped moving. His face drained of color. "You've seen this before," I said quietly. He didn't deny it. Instead, he sank back into his chair as if the weight of the room had doubled. "She showed me that picture when I was 13. She said it proved he loved her equally. And I told her it wasn't enough." The confession hung in the air. "You told her to stop fighting?" I asked. He swallowed. "I told her the courts wouldn't listen, that she was making things worse." Making things worse? For who? I pressed. He didn't answer directly. "You don't remember what it was like," he said instead. "Your uncles controlled everything, the businesses, the connections, the narrative." The narrative? They convinced people she was unstable, emotional, vindictive. Once that story spread, no lawyer wanted to touch her case. It was systematic isolation. "And you believed them?" I asked. He closed his eyes briefly. "I believed survival mattered more than pride." There it was. He hadn't just chosen silence, he had chosen alignment. My chest tightened. She lost more than money, she lost her voice. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a moment I saw the conflict behind his composure. "You think I don't know that?" he whispered. The room felt smaller, suffocating. "What happened in 1972? Why did she stop?" His expression shifted again. "There was an incident," he said carefully. "What kind of incident?" He hesitated long enough that I knew it mattered. "She received a formal notice threatening countersuit." "For what?" "Defamation, fraud. They claimed she falsified documents." My stomach churned. "She would never—" "I know that," he interrupted, "but proving innocence requires resources, money, reputation, both of which she no longer had." "So she quit?" She withdrew the claim, under pressure, under threat, under public shame. It wasn't surrender, it was coercion. Did you ever ask her if she regretted stopping? He stared at the photograph again. Every year on the anniversary of her father's death, she'd get quiet, she'd bake bread, and she'd hum. That's not an answer. She said some fights are too expensive to win. The words hit harder than anything else he'd said. Too expensive. I stood up slowly. She didn't lose because she was wrong. She lost because they were powerful. My father didn't argue. Instead, he said something that chilled me to the bone. Let it go. The finality in his tone wasn't protective. It was fearful. Why? I asked softly. He looked toward the darkened window. Because people who built their lives on foundations like that don't appreciate excavation. There it was. Not regret, not reconciliation, a warning. As I left his house, my mind raced. If my uncles had orchestrated the estate, transfer, leveraged the legal system, and controlled public perception, what else had they manipulated? I drove home with a clarity that felt almost dangerous. This wasn't just about honoring my grandmother, it was about exposing a generational power imbalance that had shaped my entire family structure. The next morning, I called a legal historian I knew through my channel, Dr. Amelia Rhodes, specialized in mid-20th century property law and gender-based inheritance disputes. When I described the case hypothetically, she didn't hesitate. In the late 60s and early 70s, she explained, women often faced procedural barriers. If male heirs consolidated control before probate finalized, contesting required substantial funds. Many claims were dismissed on technicalities. Could an estate be redirected through shell entities? I asked. Absolutely, she replied, especially if family members colluded with legal counsel. Colluded. The word crystallized everything. Would that hold up today? I asked. There was a pause. If you can prove fraudulent transfer or breach of fiduciary duty, she said carefully, there may be grounds, but statute of limitations complicates matters. Statute of limitations, time protecting wrongdoing. But if evidence was concealed, I pressed, that can reset clocks, she said. However, you'd need documentation, witnesses, something indisputable. Documentation, witnesses. I thought of Aunt Margaret, of the photograph, of the letters, of the shell corporation that dissolved conveniently. This wasn't impossible, it was simply buried. That afternoon, I received another message, not from my father this time, from my Uncle Daniel. We hear you've been asking questions. Let's meet, privately. We hear, plural. The speed at which word had spread confirmed one thing: they were monitoring the situation. I agreed to meet him at a neutral location, a quiet cafe on the edge of town. When I arrived, he was already seated, impeccably dressed, calm to the point of smugness. You've inherited Eleanor's stubborn streak, I said. Maybe I inherited her sense of justice. He smiled thinly. Justice is a flexible term. Not when assets are siphoned. His eyes sharpened. You're treading on defamation, he said lightly. The same tactic, 50 years later. I leaned forward. Did you create the shell corporation? His smile vanished. Be careful, he said. Or what? He stirred his coffee slowly, deliberately. Families survive because they protect each other. Dig too deep, and you may find yourself isolated. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. I realized then that this wasn't ancient history to him. It was unfinished business. As I stood to leave, he added one final sentence. You don't have all the facts. My pulse quickened. What facts? He met my gaze steadily. Ask your grandmother why she withdrew. The implication hit like a punch. There was something he believed would undermine her claim, something he thought I hadn't discovered yet. And as I walked out of that cafe, a cold realization settled over me. Either my grandmother had been entirely truthful, or there was something in this story so explosive that it kept her silent for decades. I didn't go home after meeting Uncle Daniel. I drove aimlessly for nearly an hour, his final words echoing in my mind. Ask your grandmother why she withdrew. The way he said it, measured, confident, suggested leverage, not confusion, not denial, leverage, which meant one of two things. Either he was bluffing, or he believed there was something in her past that justified everything. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the sky was already dark. The house felt different now, not just hollow, but watchful, as if every drawer, every frame, every corner held fragments of truth waiting to be assembled. I went straight back to the attic. If there was something explosive, it would be here. I pulled down every remaining box, old tax returns, church programs, holiday cards. Nothing scandalous, nothing incriminating. Then I noticed something odd. The letter bundles stopped abruptly in mid-1972. No legal correspondence after that, no appeals, no personal reflections. It was as if her fight simply vanished overnight. Too clean. I inspected the tin again, the one with the newspaper clipping. This time, I ran my fingers along the inner seams. There was resistance, a false bottom. My breath caught as I pried it loose with a butter knife. Beneath it lay a single folded document. Not a letter, not a photograph, a transcript, stamped with the seal of the county probate court. My heart pounded as I unfolded it. It was a record of a private in-chambers discussion between the presiding judge and legal representatives, requested by my uncle's attorney. My grandmother had not been present. I scanned quickly. Phrases jumped out. Emotional instability concerns, potential reputational harm to family businesses, settlement offer declined, advisable to discourage further pursuit. Then, halfway down the page, I saw it. A statement attributed to my uncle's counsel. If necessary, evidence regarding Miss Whitmore's personal conduct during the summer of 1967 may be introduced. Personal conduct. Summer of 1967. The transcript didn't elaborate, but it didn't need to. It was a threat, not legal rebuttal, character leverage. I sat back, pulse racing. What had happened in 1967? My grandmother would have been 19. I had never heard her mention that year specifically. The transcript continued. In light of potential scandal, withdrawal would be in all parties' best interest. Withdrawal. So she hadn't simply given up. She had been cornered. I closed my eyes, trying to think logically. If there had been something about her past they could weaponize, it would explain the sudden halt, the smear campaign, the shift from legal dispute to public humiliation. But what kind of allegation could overpower documented inheritance inequality? Fraud? No evidence? Mental health? They already hinted at instability. Immorality? My stomach twisted. In 1967, a woman's reputation could be dismantled by nothing more than rumor, an unmarried pregnancy, a relationship deemed inappropriate. Even accusations alone could destroy standing in court. I needed context. The next morning, I visited Aunt Margaret again. When I mentioned the year 1967, she stiffened. That was before she married your grandfather, she said carefully. I know. Margaret looked toward the window as if calculating risk even now. There was a man, she finally said. My chest tightened. What kind of man? Not from our town. He worked seasonally on the farmland. A laborer. Were they involved? I asked. Margaret hesitated. They were close. Close. The euphemisms were exhausting. Did she get pregnant? I asked bluntly. Margaret's silence confirmed more than words. She lost the baby, she said quietly. Very early. Only a few people knew. The air felt heavy. Did her father know? Yes. And? He didn't disown her. He didn't rage. He told her mistakes don't erase worth. Tears pricked my eyes. That sounded like the man in the photograph, steady, protective. But your uncles, Margaret continued, they were furious. They thought she embarrassed the family. There it was, a vulnerability they could weaponize. In court, Margaret added, they implied she fabricated the pregnancy to manipulate sympathy. I felt sick. She miscarried. I know, Margaret whispered, but there were no medical records, no hospital visit. It happened at home. Which meant no documentation, which meant narrative control. They were prepared to accuse her of promiscuity, of instability, of fabricating stories. Suddenly, Uncle Daniel's confidence made sense. If she pursued the claim, they would drag her through public moral scrutiny. In 1972, that would have destroyed her socially and perhaps legally. They told her, Margaret said softly, that if she withdrew, they'd let it stay private. Blackmail. My grandmother hadn't abandoned justice. She had protected her dignity. I drove home with a different kind of anger, one sharper, colder. This wasn't just financial injustice. It was coercive silencing rooted in patriarchal power structures. They had leveraged stigma, weaponized morality, and hid behind procedural technicalities. That evening, I reviewed the transcript again. There was one more detail I hadn't fully processed. At the bottom, a handwritten note by the judge. Recommend sealed filing. Sealed, meaning portions of the case record were intentionally restricted. If sealed documents still existed, they might contain direct references to the threat. But accessing sealed probate records requires court approval, which meant legal representation, which meant escalation. I hesitated. My father's warning replayed in my mind. People who built their lives on foundations like that don't appreciate excavation. But here was the truth. The excavation had already begun, and they knew it. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. A woman's voice spoke. Is this Eleanor Whitmore's granddaughter? Yes. My name is Clara Jenkins. I worked as a junior clerk in the probate office in 1972. My breath stopped. I've seen your inquiries. Some files that were sealed shouldn't have been. My pulse thundered. What do you mean? I'm retiring soon, and there are things I don't want buried with me. The room felt like it tilted. What kind of things? A recorded statement, she replied. From who? A pause. From your grandmother. My heart slammed against my ribs. She gave testimony privately. It was never entered into the public docket. Why? I whispered. Because, Kara said carefully, it contradicted the narrative being constructed. The implications were staggering. If a sworn statement existed, one suppressed intentionally, that could shift everything. Can you access it? I can't release sealed material without consequences, but I can tell you this. I held my breath. She withdrew because she was afraid of scandal. My mind raced. Then why? I pressed. Kara's next words changed everything. She withdrew because someone else's name was on the line. The air left my lungs. What does that mean? I asked urgently. There was a long silence. Then she said, "You need to ask your father about 1967. And the line went dead. I didn't sleep that night. Clara's words kept circling in my mind like a storm that refused to break. She withdrew because someone else's name was on the line. Ask your father about 1967. My father. Not my uncles. Not the laborer. My father. I sat at the kitchen table at 3:17 a.m., the probate transcript spread out in front of me, the photograph beside it. My grandmother's steady eyes stared back at me from 50 years ago, as if she'd known this reckoning would come, but not in her lifetime. What had my father not told me? At sunrise, I drove to his house without calling first. He opened the door looking exhausted, like he hadn't slept either. "You spoke to someone," he said immediately. "Yes." His shoulders sagged. We stood in the doorway for a moment, 2 generations suspended between truth and protection. "I know about 1967, I said. His expression hardened, but not defensively, fearfully. And I know the threat in court wasn't just about Grandma. The silence between us was confirmation. He stepped aside and let me in. We sat at the dining table, the same place where he had once told me to let it go, only this time there was no pretense of control in his posture. "What did she tell you?" he asked quietly. "Not her, a clerk. She said Grandma withdrew to protect someone else's name." His jaw tightened. I held his gaze. "Was that someone you?" The question hung there, raw, dangerous. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he folded his hands together like he was bracing himself against impact. "In 1967, he began slowly, your grandmother didn't just lose a pregnancy." My pulse pounded in my ears. She was assaulted. The words struck like lightning. "What?" My voice barely came out. He swallowed hard. "The man who worked on the farm, the seasonal laborer, it wasn't a romance." Everything inside me went still. "She never reported it," he continued. "In those days, it would have destroyed her. There were no protections, no sympathy, just blame." My throat burned. "She told her father," he said, "and he believed her. He promised to make sure she was secure no matter what." The photograph flashed in my mind. "Equal to your brothers, always." "But when he died," my father continued, "my uncles found out. They discovered she'd confided in him, and they reframed it." Reframed. He said they claimed she seduced the man. They implied she fabricated the assault to hide promiscuity. They said the pregnancy was proof. Rage surged through me, hot, blinding. "And in court?" I asked. "They were prepared to introduce testimony from the laborer," he said quietly. "He denied everything, said it was consensual." My stomach twisted. She had no medical report, no police record, nothing but her word, which in 1972 meant nothing at all. "So why would that affect the inheritance case?" I demanded. He looked at me with something like regret. "Because," he said, "if the court deemed her morally compromised, they could question her credibility in the estate dispute. They would paint her as unstable, vindictive, a liar." I felt physically ill. But Clara said she withdrew to protect someone else's name. My father closed his eyes briefly. She was pregnant twice, he said. The room felt like it tilted. What? The first pregnancy, the assault, ended in miscarriage, but months later, he hesitated. She became pregnant again. I stared at him, trying to process. With who? His voice dropped. With your grandfather. That part wasn't shocking. What does that have to do with the case? He exhaled slowly. You were born in early 1973. My mind stalled. I did the math automatically. Dad, whispered I was born in 1994. He looked at me steadily. I'm not talking about you. The air left my lungs. I had a sister, he said. The words felt unreal. You what? She was born premature, very small. She died after 3 days. I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. She wasn't publicly acknowledged. Your grandmother and grandfather chose privacy. My brain scrambled to connect the timeline. The probate case ended in late 1972, I said slowly. Yes. And your sister, she was conceived while the case was active. Understanding dawned in fragments. If the assault allegations were dragged through court, they could question the paternity of her second pregnancy. He nodded once. They were prepared to suggest a pattern, to imply she fabricated assault to hide affairs, to imply instability, and if that narrative gained traction, it would affect your sister, I finished. He met my eyes. They would question the legitimacy of her child. Illegitimacy. In the early 70s, that word carried devastating legal implications. Inheritance rights, social standing, future claims. If the court doubted her moral character, he said, it could cast doubt on paternity, on marital validity, on everything. And you, I realized, you were born 3 years later. Yes, you could have been tainted your legitimacy too. He nodded. She withdrew to prevent a public spectacle that would follow us forever. My chest ached. So she sacrificed her claim to protect her children. Yes. Silence swallowed the room. All those years of being described as peaceful, all those insinuations that she simply let it go. She hadn't. She calculated the cost and chose protection over vindication. Did you know all this when you told me to let it go? Yes. Anger flared. So you're protecting the same men who blackmailed her. I'm protecting you, he shot back. From what? From a legal battle that will drag our family history through headlines again, from reopening the assault, from questioning paternity decades later. His fear was tangible. They've already proven what they're willing to do, he said. If you challenge them, they won't hesitate. I stood up, pacing. They weaponized her trauma, and you think silence is still the answer? He didn't respond. I turned to him. She gave a private statement, a recorded one. Clara told me. His eyes widened slightly. You didn't know that? No. That meant even he hadn't been told everything. If that recording exists, it's her voice, not theirs. He looked torn. You don't understand how powerful your uncles still are. And you don't understand how different 2026 is from 1972. He looked at me sharply. What are you planning? I took a steady breath. I'm planning to unseal the record. The words felt irreversible. That will expose everything, he warned. Good. He stared at me stunned. You'd expose her assault? No, I said firmly. I'd expose the blackmail. Silence settled between us again, but this time it wasn't suffocating. It was decisive. Finally, he spoke. If you do this, he said slowly, you won't just be fighting over land. I know. You'll be dismantling reputations. They dismantled hers first. He looked at me for a long moment, searching for hesitation. There was none. As I walked toward the door, he said something that stopped me cold. "If you file to unseal the case," he said quietly, "Daniel won't wait." I turned. "What does that mean?" My father's face was pale. "It means he still has leverage." The implication sent ice through my veins. "What leverage?" I demanded. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "There's one more document you haven't found." My pulse quickened. "What document?" He held my gaze. "The original will." The original will. The words echoed in my mind the entire drive home. I had assumed there was no updated will, only whatever version my uncles had presented during probate. That was the narrative repeated for decades. There was no amendment, no written equal division, nothing enforceable. But my father's tone suggested something very different. If an original will existed and it contradicted what was filed, then this wasn't just coercion, it was fraud. I returned to the attic with renewed urgency. Every box I had opened before now felt incomplete. I wasn't just searching for memory, I was searching for documentation. If the will existed, my grandmother would have kept proof. She trusted paper. She archived everything. Receipts from 1981, warranty slips from appliances that no longer existed. She would not have let something that significant vanish without trace. I began reconstructing her habits. She labeled by category, she stored chronologically, she hid sensitive material separately, which meant the will wouldn't be in the letters box, it wouldn't be with tax returns. It would be somewhere symbolic. I scanned the room again. My eyes landed on the old cedar chest beneath the window, the one that held heirloom quilts. It felt too obvious, which made it perfect. I opened it slowly. The scent of cedar filled the air. Beneath folded quilts and crocheted blankets was a wooden jewelry case I'd never seen her wear. It was locked. I hesitated for only a moment before retrieving the small ring of spare keys she had once trusted me with. The third key fit. Inside the jewelry box was no jewelry, just a leather folder. My hand shook as I opened it. There it was, Last Will and Testament of Thomas Whitmore, dated March 3rd, 1966. Signed, witnessed, notarized. I scanned the first page quickly. I, Thomas Whitmore, being of sound mind, my pulse quickened as I flipped forward. To my sons, Daniel and Richard, I bequeath. Then, to my daughter, Eleanor Whitmore, I bequeath an equal 1/3 share of all land holdings, business interests, and liquid assets. Equal 1/3. It was explicit, clear, unambiguous. I read it twice to make sure I wasn't projecting hope onto legal language. It was there, in black ink. How had this never surfaced? I flipped further. There was a handwritten codicil, an amendment dated 6 months later. I reaffirm my intent that my daughter's share shall not be diminished or reassigned without her written consent. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear myself breathe. This wasn't a vague promise captured in a photograph. This was legally binding, which meant one thing: the version presented in probate had been altered or suppressed. I checked the final page. Original signature, witness signatures, notary seal. If authentic, this document invalidated everything. I sat back against the attic wall, stunned. This wasn't just about coercion anymore. It was conspiracy. My uncles hadn't merely leveraged stigma, they had replaced a will. I thought of the thin folder at the county records office, the estate distributed to next of kin listing only the sons. Where was this version filed? Or was it never filed at all? I called my father immediately. He answered on the second ring. "You found it," he said quietly. "You knew it was here." I suspected. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded. "Because possession isn't proof," he said. "They'll argue it's fabricated or that it was revoked. It's notarized. That doesn't mean the court accepted it." His realism cut through my adrenaline. "Then why keep it hidden?" I asked. There was a pause. "Because your grandmother believed that one day someone graver than her would need it." The weight of that landed heavily. "She never stopped believing she was right," he added. "Then why didn't she present this in court?" "She did," he said softly. My heart skipped. "And?" "They claimed it was superseded by a later version." I froze. "What later version?" "One dated weeks before his death," he replied. "It left everything to the sons." Forgery. The word hovered unspoken. "Did she see that version?" I asked. "Yes." "And?" "She said it was impossible. Her father was hospitalized during that time." My pulse surged. "Incapacitated?" "Sedated heavily," my father confirmed. "Pneumonia complications." Which meant, if someone produced a new will during hospitalization, he nodded slowly, it could have been executed under questionable conditions. My mind raced through the implications. Undue influence, fraudulent execution, lack of testamentary capacity. "These are criminal acts," I said. "They would have been," he corrected gently, "if proven." The precision of that word "proven" reminded me how carefully systems protect themselves. "I'm getting this authenticated," I said. "You'll need forensic handwriting analysis, paper dating, notary verification." "I know. And once you initiate that," he warned, "there's no quiet resolution." "I'm past quiet." Silence stretched. Finally, he said something I didn't expect. "I'll testify." I blinked. "What?" "If it comes to court," he said steadily, "I'll testify about the hospitalization, about the threats, about the coercion." Emotion rose unexpectedly in my throat. "Are you sure?" I asked. He exhaled. "I've carried this long enough." For the first time since this began, I felt something shift. Not just excavation, alignment. That evening, I scanned the will and sent a secure copy to Dr. Amelia Rhodes, along with a request for a referral to a probate litigation specialist. Within hours, she responded. "If authentic, this document is explosive. The existence of conflicting wills during incapacitation opens potential for posthumous fraud claims. Statute of limitations may be tolled due to concealment." Tolling. Resetting. Meaning this wasn't legally dead, it was dormant. As I sat at my desk absorbing that possibility, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. A male voice this time, measured, calm. "You've been very busy." I didn't respond. "I assume you found something interesting." "Uncle Richard." "I don't discuss legal matters without counsel," I replied. A soft chuckle. "You're escalating beyond your comprehension." "I understand fraud." Another pause. "You think a piece of paper changes history." "I think it reveals it." His tone sharpened slightly. "You should consider the cost." "Of what?" "Exposure cuts both ways." The implication chilled me. "I don't have anything to hide." "You're certain?" he replied. The call ended. I stared at the screen. Exposure cuts both ways. What did he think I didn't know? What narrative were they preparing now? I glanced at the will again. The ink, the signatures, the intent. If they were nervous enough to call, they knew this document mattered. But there was still one unknown variable: the version filed in probate. If I could obtain a certified copy of the 1972 will entered into record, I could compare signatures, which meant going back to the county office, publicly. And once I did that, this would no longer be a quiet family inquiry. It would be an official investigation. As I shut down my computer, a final thought settled in my mind, steady and irreversible. They had underestimated her, and they were underestimating me. Tomorrow, I would request the certified probate file, and if the signatures didn't match, the quiet injustice of 1972 would become a very loud reckoning. The county records office opened at 8:30 a.m. I was there at 8:12. The air outside was cold, sharp enough to keep my thoughts focused. I wasn't walking in as a grieving granddaughter anymore. I was walking in as a claimant preparing to challenge a half-century-old probate judgment. When the doors unlocked, I stepped inside with a clarity that felt almost surgical. I need a certified copy of the Whitmore Estate probate file from 1972, I told the clerk. She hesitated. That file has restricted elements. I'm aware. I'm requesting the publicly entered will and supporting documents. After several minutes and 2 supervisory consultations, she disappeared into the archive room. When she returned, she carried a thicker folder than the one I'd been shown before. That alone told me something. Certain items were reclassified after digitization, she said neutrally. Reclassified. Translation: buried deeper. I signed the request log and moved to a quiet table. My pulse slowed deliberately. Emotion would not help me here. Precision would. I opened the folder. There it was. Last Will and Testament of Thomas Whitmore, dated September 14, 1966. 6 months after the original I'd found in the attic. I scanned quickly. To my sons, Daniel and Richard, I bequeath the entirety. No mention of Eleanor. No equal share. Nothing. I flipped to the signature page. My breath caught. The signature looked similar, but something was off. The slant was steeper, the pressure heavier. The T in Thomas was sharper, less fluid. I placed the certified copy beside the scanned image of the original will from the attic. Even to an untrained eye, the rhythm of the handwriting differed. One looked natural, the other looked practiced. I checked the witness names, different witnesses than those on the March will, and the notary, a man's whose license number I didn't recognize. I photographed every page carefully. Then I looked at the date again, September 14, 1966. I texted my father immediately. Was Grandpa hospitalized in September 1966? The reply came quickly. Yes, pneumonia relapse. He was sedated intermittently. Could he have met privately with a notary? A long pause. Then, no. The room felt very still. If he was sedated, if he was physically compromised, then executing a new will under those conditions would require either coercion or fabrication. I flipped further into the file. Attached was a physician's statement dated September 12, 1966, 2 days before the will. It read, "Patient experiencing respiratory distress, sedation administered, cognitive clarity fluctuating." Fluctuating. Not legally definitive, but enough to question testamentary capacity. I sat back slowly. This wasn't circumstantial anymore. This was structural. 2 wills, conflicting distributions, one executed during hospitalization with documented sedation, and one conveniently excluding the daughter who later contested the estate. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Dr. Rhodes. "I've reviewed the scan," she said without preamble. "The March will appears structurally consistent with mid-60s formatting. The September one shows anomalies, such as spacing inconsistencies, margin alignment deviations, and the signature stroke pattern differs. Forensic differences? Potentially significant ones. I felt my pulse steady, not from calm, but from inevitability. "What's the next step?" I asked. "You file a petition to reopen probate based on newly discovered evidence and alleged fraudulent concealment. That will trigger opposition." "Of course," she said evenly, "but the burden shifts. They'll need to prove validity of the later will." I glanced at the physician's note again. Could testamentary capacity be challenged retroactively? "Yes," she replied, "especially if medical documentation suggests cognitive impairment." For the first time since this began, the path forward felt legally coherent, not emotional, not symbolic, strategic. I left the office with certified copies in hand. By noon, my uncles knew. I know this because at 12:47 p.m., a black SUV was parked across from my house, engine running, windows tinted. It wasn't subtle. Intimidation rarely is. I didn't approach it. Instead, I documented it. Photographs, timestamps, and then I called my father. "They're escalating," I said. He didn't ask how I knew. "They think fear will slow you down." It won't. There was a long silence. Then he said something that shifted everything. "There's something else." My chest tightened. "What?" "In 1973, he said slowly, after the case closed, Daniel transferred a portion of the farmland into a trust." "For who?" "For me." The room seemed to tilt. "What?" "It was positioned as a gesture of reconciliation," he said, "but the trust had conditions." "What conditions?" "That I would not support any future legal action regarding the estate." My breath caught. "You signed that?" "I was 23, he said quietly, "and your sister had just died. I wanted stability." The layers of coercion deepened. "So they didn't just silence her, they bound you." "Yes." "And if you testify?" "The trust dissolves. The land reverts to the primary estate holders," meaning Daniel and Richard. "They'll lose nothing," I said bitterly. "They'll lose leverage." I understood then. The trust wasn't generosity, it was containment. "If you break the condition," I asked carefully, "can they sue you?" "They can try." "And will you still testify?" He didn't hesitate this time. "Yes." I closed my eyes briefly. This was no longer a solitary excavation, it was generational. At 3:02 p.m., I received formal notice via email, a cease and desist letter from Whitmore Holdings' legal department. It accused me of defamation, harassment, intent to damage corporate reputation. They were moving preemptively. I read it twice. Not once did it not deny the existence of conflicting wills. That silence was telling. I forwarded the letter to Dr. Rhodes and the litigation specialist she recommended. Their response was immediate. "This confirms they're concerned." By evening, the SUV was gone, but the message remained. This was no longer quiet research, it was confrontation. I sat alone that night, the two wills spread before me. March 3, 1966, September 14, 1966. Equal share, total exclusion. Two futures written months apart, only one legally survived. I thought about my grandmother at 22, standing alone in a courtroom, carrying trauma, facing 3 lawyers and 2 brothers who had already rewritten her narrative. She hadn't lacked courage, she'd lacked structural support. But I had something she didn't: documentation, digital replication, public transparency. And time had shifted the cultural ground. If I filed the petition tomorrow, the case would move into public record. Media could pick it up. Historical injustice, fraud, gendered inheritance bias. They couldn't suppress that as easily in 2026. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. It was a text message. No greeting, just one sentence. "You're missing the final piece." I stared at it. No sender ID beyond a prepaid number. I typed back cautiously. "What piece?" The response came instantly. "The hospital log." My heart thudded. September 66, sedation, execution date. If the hospital maintained entry logs, visitor signatures, timestamps, it could prove whether a notary or witnesses were physically present, which means proving whether the September will could even have been signed legally. I typed one more message. Who is this? The reply chilled me. Someone who was there. The message sat on my screen like a live wire. Someone who was there. There are moments in life when instinct splits into two paths, fear or forward. I chose forward. Where can we meet? I typed. The reply came after a long 30 seconds. St. Matthew's Hospital, Archive Wing, 9 a.m. Come alone. St. Matthew's. The same hospital listed on my grandfather's medical record in September 1966. My pulse was steady now, not calm, but sharpened. This was escalation, not intimidation, not speculation, evidence. I barely slept. At 8:52 a.m., I walked through the sliding glass doors of St. Matthew's. The building had been renovated since the 60s, but the administrative wing still carried the scent of paper and antiseptic history. The archive office was tucked behind a frosted glass corridor. An elderly man stood near the records desk, leaning on a cane. His posture was frail, but his eyes were alert, measuring. "You're Eleanor's granddaughter?" he said quietly. "Yes. My name is Harold Bennett." The name hit something faint in my memory. I had seen it before. On the September will. Witness signature, Harold Bennett. My heart pounded. "You signed the will," I said carefully. His jaw tightened. "Yes." The room seemed to compress. "Was my grandfather conscious?" I asked. He closed his eyes briefly. "No." The word landed like a gavel strike. "He was sedated heavily," Harold continued. "Your uncles insisted it was urgent. They said he'd already approved changes and just needed formal execution." "And you believed them?" I asked. I was 27, junior administrative staff. They told me the notary had cleared it. "But he didn't sign it?" I pressed. Harold looked directly at me. His hand was guided. The air left my lungs. "Guided? You mean—" "Yes." A wave of nausea rolled through me. "His hand was guided," Harold said quietly. "Your Uncle Daniel held his wrist." The room felt unreal. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because I've carried it for 60 years. He reached into his leather satchel and pulled out a thin folder. Hospital Visitor Log, September 14th, 1966. My hands trembled as I opened it. There it was. Visitor entries. 9:12 a.m., Daniel Whitmore. 9:14 a.m., Richard Whitmore. No notary entry. No second witness entry beyond Harold's. "But the will lists a notary," I said carefully. "Yes, he wasn't there." Forgery. Not just undue influence, fabrication. My pulse thundered in my ears. "If you testify," I said slowly, "this changes everything." Harold's gaze was steady. "I will." The weight of that commitment felt seismic. But before relief could settle, my phone buzzed. A notification. Breaking news alert. Whittemore Holdings announces major land acquisition merger. I stared at the headline. They were consolidating assets. If the estate land was folded into a larger corporate entity, disentangling ownership would become exponentially more complex. "They're moving fast," Harold said quietly, reading my expression. They knew. They were restructuring to shield exposure. I stepped outside and called Dr. Rhodes immediately. "They're transferring land into a merger," she replied. "That's asset shielding. We file an emergency injunction today." "With what?" "With what you have," she said. "The March will, the hospital log, the witness statement. Witness statement. Harold will testify, I said. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. Then we move now. By 1:30 p.m., the petition to reopen probate and request injunctive relief was electronically filed. By 2:10 p.m., my Uncle Daniel called. His voice was no longer calm. You've crossed a line. I crossed it in 1966. You have no idea what you're unleashing. I know exactly. There was a long pause. You think dragging your grandmother's trauma into court honors her? The manipulation was surgical. She didn't withdraw because of weakness. She withdrew because you threatened her children. Silence. You don't have proof of that, he said. I have more than you think. Another pause, longer this time. Then he said something that chilled me. You should check your email. The call ended. My heart pounded as I opened my inbox. An attachment. Subject line, truth. Inside was a scanned letter dated 1972 from my grandmother, addressed to Daniel. I withdraw my claim voluntarily and without coercion. My chest tightened. Signed. Her signature. If authentic, it undermined coercion entirely. I stared at it, mind racing. Was this the leverage they still held? Had she signed something explicitly denying pressure? My phone rang again. Dr. Rhodes. They've submitted a response, she said, including a withdrawal letter. I just received it. Stay calm, she said firmly. Voluntary statements signed under duress can still be challenged, especially if connected to blackmail. But could I prove blackmail? I thought of Clara, the sealed recording. She gave a private testimony, I said, suddenly. It was sealed. If we can compel release, Rhodes replied, it may contradict the withdrawal letter. Everything hinged on that recording. At 4:47 p.m., the court granted a temporary 72-hour hold on any estate-related asset transfers pending preliminary review. 72 hours. A pause in their consolidation, a crack in their armor. But this was only the beginning. At 6:03 p.m., I received another message from the unknown number. They're meeting tonight, 8 p.m., Whittemore Holdings boardroom. How do you know? I typed. They still work there. My pulse spiked. What are they planning? The reply came slower this time. They're going to argue incapacity of witness, discredit Harold, and question authenticity of the March will. Predictable. Anything else? I asked. There was a long delay. Then, they're considering a settlement offer. Settlement. Money in exchange for silence. I laughed softly to myself. After everything, they still believed this was about payout? At 7:58 p.m., my phone rang again. Daniel. We're prepared to resolve this privately, he said, without greeting. I'm listening. A financial settlement, significant, in exchange for withdrawal of claims and non-disclosure. There it was, the same tactic, different decade. I'm not negotiating. You're risking destroying this family's legacy. You destroyed it in 1966. His voice sharpened. You think public sympathy wins lawsuits? No, I replied. Evidence does. There was a final pause. Then he said something that chilled me. You don't have the recording. My pulse stopped for half a second. He sounded certain, and that certainty terrified me. After the call ended, I dialed Clara immediately. It rang once, twice. No answer. I tried again. Voicemail. A cold realization crept in. If they believed I didn't have the recording, did that mean they did? Or worse, had they already ensured it would never surface? At 9:12 p.m., another notification appeared on my phone. Court update. Emergency hearing scheduled, 9 a.m. tomorrow. less than 12 hours away, and suddenly everything hinged on one question. Did the sealed recording still exist, or had it disappeared just like they intended? I didn't sleep. There are nights when exhaustion wins, and there are nights when truth keeps your eyes open. By 8:30 a.m., I was seated inside Courtroom 4B, hands folded tightly in my lap, the two wills secured in a leather binder beside me. Across the aisle, Daniel and Richard Whitmore sat with 3 attorneys, just like 1972. Some patterns don't change easily. My father sat behind me. Harold Bennett sat 2 rows over. 2 generations, 1 witness, 1 granddaughter, and 60 years of silence pressing against the walls. At 9:02 a.m., the judge entered. The emergency petition was straightforward: request to reopen probate due to newly discovered evidence suggesting fraudulent execution of a superseding will, and a motion to unseal related testimony. The opposing counsel argued predictably. The March will lacks verified chain of custody. The September will was properly filed and upheld. The petitioner's claims rely on fading memories and speculative inference. Speculative. Harold was called first. His hands trembled slightly as he was sworn in. "Mr. Bennett," my attorney began, "were you present in the hospital room on September 14th, 1966? "Yes." "Was Thomas Whitmore fully conscious and independently signing the will?" A pause. "No." The courtroom air shifted. "Please clarify." His hand was guided by Daniel Whitmore. Gasps were subtle but present. Daniel's jaw tightened. The opposing counsel moved quickly. "Mr. Bennett, you're 90 years old. Is it possible your memory is flawed?" Harold didn't flinch. "I have carried that image every day of my life. It has not faded." The visitor log was entered into record. No notary entry, no second independent witness. Then came the medical documentation: sedation, cognitive fluctuation. The judge's expression shifted slightly. But the turning point came when my attorney requested formal review of the sealed in-chambers testimony from 1972. Whitmore counsel objected immediately. Sealed for privacy and reputational protection. The judge looked over her glasses. Reputational protection is not a legal shield against fraud. The objection was overruled. A court clerk exited the room to retrieve the archived material. Every second felt like suspended breath. Daniel stared straight ahead. Richard avoided eye contact entirely. My father's hand rested lightly on the back of my chair. At 9:47 a.m., the clerk returned. A cassette tape in a sealed evidence bag. The label read, E. Whitmore, Private Statement, 1972. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might echo. The tape was placed into an old playback unit maintained for archival cases. Static crackled through the speakers. Then, her voice. Soft, steady, controlled. "I am withdrawing my claim because I have been advised that my personal history will be used to discredit my character and, by extension, question the legitimacy of my children." The courtroom went utterly silent. I do not concede that the September will reflects my father's true intent. I believe it was executed under undue influence. However, I will not allow my trauma to become spectacle for the preservation of wealth. My throat burned. I make this withdrawal under pressure, not agreement. There it was, clear, unambiguous, under pressure, not voluntary. Daniel's attorney stood abruptly. "Objection!" "Overruled," the judge said firmly. The tape continued. "If this recording is ever heard beyond this room, it will mean someone finally chose courage." I felt tears slip down my face, but I didn't wipe them away. The recording ended. No one spoke for several seconds. Then the judge leaned forward. "Counsel," she addressed the Whitmore attorneys, "your client's position appears materially compromised." Their composure was fracturing now. The judge continued, "Based on the witness testimony, medical documentation, and the decedent's recorded statement, this court finds sufficient cause to reopen probate proceedings and initiate forensic authentication of both wills." A crack in history. "Additionally," she added, "a preliminary injunction is granted prohibiting any transfer, merger, or liquidation of contested estate assets pending review." 72 hours had become indefinite. Daniel's face had lost all color. This wasn't settlement territory anymore. This was exposure. Outside the courthouse, reporters had already gathered. Word travels fast when corporate names surface in legal filings. Microphones extended. "Are you pursuing damages? Is this about money? Do you intend to sue your uncles personally?" I answered carefully. "This isn't about money. It's about historical correction. It's about a woman whose credibility was dismantled to protect power." My father stepped beside me, for the first time publicly. My mother was not unstable. She was cornered. The headlines that followed weren't about scandal. They were about suppression, about gendered inheritance bias, about coercion hidden behind procedural law. Within weeks, forensic analysis confirmed what our instincts already knew. The March will was authentic. The September will contained signature irregularities consistent with guided execution. The notary's signature had been stamped, not signed. Criminal prosecution was complicated by time and statute limitations, but civil consequences were not. A settlement was reached, not privately, not quietly, publicly. The estate was restructured to reflect equal distribution as outlined in the March will. A charitable trust was established in Eleanor Whitmore's name, dedicated to legal advocacy for women challenging inheritance discrimination. Daniel and Richard resigned from Whitmore Holdings' executive positions within months, not imprisoned, but exposed, and for the first time, accountability felt not theoretical. The day the trust was announced, I returned to the farmland. The stretch of land from the photograph still existed, though developed at the edges. I stood where she once stood beside her father, wind brushing against my coat. Silence, but not the suffocating kind, the settled kind. I brought the photograph with me, and the transcript, and the will. Proof that truth, even delayed, does not decay. It waits. People often ask me now, was it worth it? The scrutiny, the legal fees, the fractured relationships? Yes, because silence compounds injustice, and loyalty without integrity is not loyalty at all. It's compliance. My grandmother did not lose because she was wrong. She lost because she protected those she loved more than she protected herself. And sometimes justice is not about reversing the past, it's about restoring narrative. In the end, what mattered most wasn't the land, it wasn't the money. It was hearing her voice in that courtroom, clear, unshaken, choosing dignity even under threat. As I walked back to my car, I felt something settle inside me. Not triumph, resolution. The whisper of the past was no longer a warning, it was a reminder. Power can distort truth for decades, But truth, when documented and defended, outlives power. And if you're watching this, wondering whether digging into your own family history is worth the discomfort, ask yourself this: who benefits from your silence? Because somewhere, someone before you chose protection over exposure. And maybe, just maybe, they were waiting for you to finish the fight.